The limestone marker was gone. That was the first thing I noticed. Yesterday, that jagged tooth of white rock had stood 6 inches above the waterline, dry enough for a lizard to sun itself. Now, the river had swallowed it whole. I checked my watch. 0900. Too early for snowmelt. The nights on the plateau were still freezing hard. This was a release. Somewhere upstream, a technician had opened a sluice gate. The canyon was filling up like a bathtub with the drain plugged. I ran the math. The rise was pushing 6 inches an hour. In this narrow throat of the canyon, that translated to a doubling of cubic feet per second by noon. The physics of the river were changing under my boots. A tug on my dry bag strap settled the load. I scanned the eddy line. That was when I saw the color. Navy blue. Wrong. Nature didn't make that shade in the canyon. Here, everything was rust, ochre, or the milky green of glacial silt. The blue was synthetic. Sharp. I stepped closer over the slick river stones. The object was tangled in the exposed roots of an ancient oak hanging over the bank. A strainer. A death trap. The current pinned the mass against the wood with hydraulic indifference. It wasn't a tarp. It was a shoulder. My training kicked in. I didn't see a human. I saw a heavy object in a hazardous feature. I dropped my pack and waded in. The water hit my calves. 48 degrees. The cold bit through the neoprene of my trousers instantly. Cold enough to sap the heat from a body in 20 minutes. If he had been in there all night, he was already part of the geology. I braced my legs against the current and grabbed the fabric. Wool. Fine. Expensive. Now heavy as lead. The suit was shredded at the seams, lining hanging out like spilled guts. I gripped the leather belt and pulled. The river fought back, wanting to keep him. Thousands of pounds of hydraulic pressure pressed him into the roots. I dug my boots into the mud, gritted my teeth, and heaved with everything in my lats. He came free with a wet sucking sound and rolled over in the eddy. I dragged him onto the silt bank. My breath came in short, sharp bursts. Exertion, not panic. I checked for a pulse out of habit. My fingers pressed into the cold flesh of his neck. A flutter. Weak. Thready. But there. Adrenaline sharpened my vision. Not debris. A survivor. I assessed him quickly. 40. Soft hands. Manicured nails. Not a hiker. Definitely not a river rat. He wore dress shoes, Italian leather, scuffed and ruined by the rocks. I patted down the ruined jacket. No wallet. No phone. Just a laminate card on a lanyard in the interior pocket. Julian V. Internal audit. The date stamp was yesterday afternoon. Yesterday, he was in a climate-controlled office. Today, he was half drowned in Dead Man's Mile. He coughed. A wet, ugly sound expelling river water and bile. His eyes snapped open. Glassy. Shock and hypothermia. He thrashed, claws digging into the mud, still fighting the river in his mind. I pinned his shoulders with my body weight. Solid ground, I said. Flat. Commanding, "You're on solid ground." He stopped struggling and stared up at the strip of sky between the canyon walls. His lips moved. A ghost of a voice, lost in the gorge's acoustics. I leaned my ear close to his mouth. The numbers, he wheezed. His teeth chattered violently. Legal hold. They threw me. I sat back, wiped the river silt from my hands. The water lapped at the heels of his ruined Italian shoes. The river was still rising. We couldn't stay on the mud bank. The math was unforgiving. at 6 inches an hour. This spot would be underwater in 45 minutes. I had to move him. There was a limestone overhang 50 yards downstream, 20 feet up the slope. Not a cave, just a deep undercut offering shelter from the wind. Getting him there was a brutal exercise in leverage. He couldn't walk. His legs were rubbery, useless from the cold. I half carried, half dragged him over the scree. Every step was a calculation. My calves burned. The sweat freezing on my back was a dangerous moisture layer I'd have to manage later. We collapsed onto the stone shelf. I checked the time. 20 minutes gone. The river below was already licking at the logs where I had found him. Triage mode. Rule 1 of hypothermia. Remove the heat sink. I stripped the sodden jacket off him. Then the dress shirt. He shivered violently. The umbles, stumbles, mumbles, grumbles were setting in hard. He was sliding down the consciousness scale. I wrapped a thermal blanket around his shoulders and forced him to drink lukewarm water from my canteen. I needed to assess injuries before planning extraction. I ran my hands over his limbs. Secondary survey. Scrapes. Road rash. Skeletal structure seemed intact. Lucky. Or the river had been oddly gentle. Then I saw the arm. I rolled up the left sleeve of his undershirt. Inside the elbow. Right in the crook. A mark. Not a bruise from a rock. A precise, purple hematoma surrounding a single, angry red puncture wound. I froze. I ran through the catalogue of river injuries I'd seen in 15 years. Fish hooks, thorns, stings. This was none of those. This was medical, or chemical. I looked at his face. Out cold again. Breathing shallow. Someone had accessed his vein. Recently. Internal audit. They threw me. And a needle mark implies sedation. Ketamine. Paralytic. This wasn't a rafter who fell out. This was a disposal job. A sound cut through my analysis. From above, the canyon walls acted like a parabolic dish, amplifying the rim. A low, grinding mechanical noise. Distinct from the white noise of the water. Tires on gravel. Heavy tires. I stiffened. My hand went to the knife on my PFD. The sound grew louder. Stopped. A car door slammed. The echo cracked like a rifle shot. It bounced back and forth between the walls for 5 times before fading. Someone was on the old logging road on the north rim. A road washed out a decade ago. No tourists. No rangers. I crawled to the edge of the overhang. Profile low against the stone. I couldn't see the rim. Too steep. But I heard them. Voices. Not the excited shouts of search and rescue. Low. Flat. Controlled, scanning the lower sector. The voice drifted down. Distorted. Audible. I pulled back into the shadows. My heart rate dropped. A conditioned response to danger. Julian slept, wrapped in foil. He wasn't a survivor. He was evidence. And the people on the rim weren't scanning for life. They were scanning for a body. I clamped my hand gently over Julian's mouth. Just in case. We weren't alone. The river was trying to drown us from below. Something else was hunting us from above. I checked the water. Still rising. We were trapped in a stone corridor, and the walls were getting higher by the minute. The first bullet didn't make a sound. It just slapped the water near the bow, sending up a small, neat geyser of spray. I didn't need a second warning. Push, I ordered. My voice wasn't loud, but it had the tone I used when a raft was about to wrap around a rock, the tone that bypassed panic and hit the motor cortex directly. Julian stared at the splash, then at me. His face was grey, the colour of old ash. He was gripping the safety line of the raft so hard his knuckles looked like polished bone. He didn't move now. "Julian," I said, "or we stay here." We were on the gravel bar where I launched for the high-water runs. The raft, a 14-foot self-bailer that had seen too many seasons, was half-beached. The river pulled at the stern, impatient. Behind us, the sound of the truck engine grew louder, grinding gears as it navigated the steep switchbacks of the access road. They were committed. I shoved the bow hard. The rubber scraped against the stones. A sound like tearing canvas, and then the river took us. The current grabbed the hull with surprising force, swinging the nose downstream. I vaulted over the tube, landing in the guide seat at the rear. "Get down," I told him. "Stay in the center. Don't touch the water." Another thwip splash. Closer, this time. 3 feet from his left shoulder. I dug the oars in. The first stroke was heavy, fighting the eddy fence, but the second caught the main flow. We surged forward. The acceleration was instant. A physical kick in the lower back. This wasn't the lazy summer flow I used for tourists. This was floodwater, fast, muscular, and opaque with silt. Julian scrambled into the footwell, curling into a fetal ball among the dry bags. He was shaking, not just from the cold now. He was a man who lived in spreadsheets and courtrooms, and I had just thrown him into a washing machine filled with liquid sandpaper. "They're shooting," he whispered. "It wasn't a question they missed," I said. I focused on the river. The entrance to Dead Man's Mile was less than a quarter-mile downstream. I needed to ferry us across the main channel to set up for the first drop. The canyon walls rose up around us, cutting off the morning sun. The temperature dropped 10 degrees in seconds. The roar of the water bounced off the stone, amplifying into a constant, low-frequency rumble that vibrated in my chest. I looked back once. A silhouette stood on the ridge, small against the sky. He lowered what looked like a rifle. He wasn't rushing. He knew where the river went. He knew there were no takeouts for the next 12 miles. We were committed. The only way out was through. I turned my attention forward. The river was changing. The glassy tongue of the current was breaking up into chop. Whitecaps appeared, standing waves caused by the increased volume of water hitting the submerged boulder garden at the canyon entrance. "Listen to me," I said, pitching my voice under the roar. "The water is rising." The hydraulics are going to be weird. If I yell, "high side," you throw your weight to the high side of the boat. Do not think. Just move. "Understand," he nodded, eyes wide, fixated on the bottom of the raft where a small puddle of water was sloshing around his Italian shoes. "I can't swim," he said. The admission was quiet, almost lost in the noise. I looked at his life jacket. I had cinched it tight, checking the straps myself. It would float him, but in this water, floating wasn't enough. The cold would seize his muscles before he could dog paddle 10 feet. "Then stay in the boat," I said, "and pray I don't miss a stroke." The first wave hit us. It was cold, brutal, and smelled of mud and ancient stone. It washed over the bow, soaking Julian instantly. He gasped, a sharp intake of breath that sounded like a sob. I didn't offer comfort. I rowed. The river didn't care about his fear, and right now, neither could I. My job was physics, angles, momentum, and leverage. Empathy was a luxury we couldn't afford until we hit flat water. My mental map said the grinder was class 3. Technical. Manageable. The map was wrong. The flood release had drowned the familiar rocks. The anvil. Split rock. Gone. Buried under tons of surging brown water. The grinder was now a single, massive wave train ending in a hydraulic hole that looked hungry. It sounded like a freight train derailment, a chaotic, low-frequency rumble that vibrated through the rubber floor of the raft and up into the soles of my boots. "Hold on!" I yelled. We hit the first wave. The raft bucked like a kicked horse. The bow shot skyward, hanging for a terrifying second before slamming down into the trough. Water poured in, icy, heavy. It hit us with the weight of wet concrete. Julian screamed. It was a high, thin sound that cut through the roar of the river. He scrambled backward, away from the water, shifting his weight to the stern. Right where I was sitting. "Get forward!" I shouted. "Weight forward!" If the stern was too heavy, the bow would rise too high. The wind or the next wave would flip us backward. A backflip in a hole this size was a death sentence. He didn't move. He was paralyzed, eyes locked on the wall of water rising ahead of us. He was a dead weight, a liability. For a split second, I wasn't looking at Julian. I was looking at a client on the Snake River, 5 years ago. The same frozen eyes, the same refusal to breathe. We had fished that client out of a strainer 3 miles downstream, blue and empty. I didn't have time to be gentle. I let go of one oar, grabbed the back of his life jacket, and shoved him hard towards the bow. "Move!" He stumbled forward, hitting his knees on the thwarts. The shift in balance dropped the nose just as we hit the crest of the second wave. We punched through instead of going over. Water exploded around us, blinding and suffocating. For a second, the world was nothing but noise and cold pressure against my eardrums. Then we were through, sliding down the backside of the wave into the eddy below. The raft spun. I fought the oars, my lats burning with the effort, forcing the boat straight. My breath tore at my throat, harsh and ragged. We drifted into the calmer water. The boat was heavy, sluggish with the hundreds of gallons of water we had taken on. I looked at Julian. He was curled in the bottom of the boat, coughing up water, his expensive suit plastered to his skin like a shedding skin. He looked small. "Broken. You almost flipped us," I said. My voice was flat. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind a cold, hard anger. "I told you to stay centered." He wiped his face with a shaking hand. He didn't look at me. He was looking at the water swirling in the footwell. "I'm sorry," he whispered. I froze. "Freezing kills," I said. I picked up the bailing bucket, a cut-off plastic bleach bottle tied to the thwart, and threw it at him. It bounced off his chest. "Bail." "Get the water out." He stared at the bucket as if it were an alien artifact. "Now." "Julian." Before the next one, he picked it up. His hands were shaking so bad he could barely grip the handle. He started to scoop water, his movements jerky and inefficient. He was splashing as much back in as he was throwing out. I watched him for a second, assessing. He wasn't useless. He was in shock. There was a difference. But in the canyon, the result was the same. I needed a partner. I had a passenger. 2 hands, I instructed. Softer this time, but no less firm. Rhythm. Scoop and throw. Scoop and throw. I rowed us gently, keeping us in the main flow but away from the walls. I scanned the river ahead. The water was darker here, deeper. The canyon walls were closing in, rising vertical and sheer. There were no beaches here, no way to climb out. We had survived the grinder, but we had lost something. I looked at the spare oar I kept strapped to the frame. It was gone, torn away by the force of the water or Julian's scrambling. We were down to one spare. One mistake away from being helpless. I looked up at the rim. It was empty now, just a jagged line of blue sky. But I knew they were there, moving parallel to us, waiting for the river to do their work for them. We pulled into a small alcove 2 miles downstream. It wasn't a campsite. It was just a fracture in the wall where the rock had crumbled away, leaving a shelf of debris high enough to be dry. For now. The air here was damp and cold, smelling of wet limestone and trapped shadows. I needed to rest my arms. The adrenaline crash was hitting me, leaving my muscles trembling and my joints aching. We needed to re-rig the boat. The violent tossing in the grinder had loosened the straps on the dry bags. Julian collapsed onto a flat rock, shivering uncontrollably. His lips were blue. I handed him an energy packet, pure glucose gel. Eat, I said, all of it. I walked over to the canyon wall. I was looking for the high water marks from the '83 flood, etched into the sandstone like tree rings. I found them, faint lines of mineral deposits. Then I looked at the water. It was creeping up the rock face, silent and relentless. I pulled a sharp piece of slate from the ground and scratched a line at the water's edge. I waited. 5 minutes. The water swallowed the line. I scratched another one, higher. This wasn't just a release. This was a purge. The dam operators weren't just generating power or managing levels. They were flushing the system. It's moving too fast, I muttered. Release schedule, Julian said. His voice was raspy, broken by the chattering of his teeth. He was staring at a piece of driftwood lodged in a crack near his head. It wasn't wood. It was a fragment of a shipping crate, stamped with a faded logo, Varian Energy. I turned. What? They run? Turbines at peak, 4 to 8 p.m., he stammered. He was reciting, clinging to the data like a lifeline, standard SOP. But to get a rise rate, this high, they have to be opening the spillways too. Why? I asked. It's a drought year. That water is worth millions. He looked up at me. For the first time, there was something in his eyes besides fear. There was recognition. A pattern emerging from the chaos, not about. The water, he said. He coughed, curling tighter into himself to preserve heat. It's the wash. Scouring the canyon floor. Scouring it of what? He touched the bruise on his arm. The needle mark, evidence. I looked at the river. It looked different now. It wasn't just a force of nature anymore. It was a tool. A massive, industrial solvent being poured down the drain to clean up a mess. And we were the mess, you remember, I said. He nodded slowly. Auditor. Internal compliance. I found discrepancies. Structural maintenance logs. They haven't been fixing the cracks. They've been paying off the inspectors. He paused, swallowing hard, fighting for air. I downloaded the files. To a drive. I was going to turn it over. Where is it? I asked. My instinct was screaming at me. He was a liability. He couldn't paddle. He couldn't swim. But he knew the why. He patted his empty pockets. He looked at the river. A look of devastating realization crossed his face. Gone, he whispered. They took it. Before they? Through me. So you have nothing, I said. The cold anger was back. We're risking our lives for nothing. No, he said. He tapped his temple. I have the codes. The encryption keys. For the server backups. As long as I'm alive. They can't delete the originals. That's why they need me dead. Not just missing. Dead. He looked at the rising water. If I drown, it's an accident. A tragedy. Case closed. I looked at the line I had scratched on the rock. It was underwater again. The stakes had just shifted. I wasn't saving a man. I was saving the only thing that could stop a corporation from weaponizing a river. My instinct said cut the weight. My logic said keep the key, get in the boat. I said, we can't. Go back out there, he said. Looking at the dark water. The water is going to cover this shelf in an hour, I said. And they know that. That's why they're flushing. We have to stay ahead of the crest. I grabbed the bowline. We're not running from them anymore. Julian. We're racing them. We pushed off, just as the water licked my boots. The launch wasn't clean. The river had changed character in the 20 minutes we had spent ashore. It was no longer just a high-volume flow. It was erratic, surging in pulses that defied the natural rhythm of the canyon. I rowed hard, ferry gliding across the main current to catch the tongue of deeper water. The raft felt heavy, sluggish under the extra weight of the water we hadn't managed to bail out. Julian was huddled in the bow, his knees pulled to his chest, staring at the canyon walls sliding past. He wasn't shivering anymore. He was calculating. It's a step-up release, he stammered. Teeth chattering, voice vibrating with the cold. I focused on the reed. Water was brown mussel, boiling up in mushrooms, upwellings that could spin a boat 180 degrees without warning. They don't open gates all at once, he forced out. He was fighting the hypothermia to get the words out, too much structural stress on the concrete. Step it up. 20%. Every 15 minutes, I dug the left oar. Corrected our angle against a lateral wave, meaning I yelled over the water, "This isn't the surge," he looked upstream. Eyes wide behind cracked glasses, pressure wave. The real volume, the wall, is 20 minutes behind. When that hits, CFS triples, tripling the flow. In this channel, that changed physics. Features wash out. Holes become keepers. The river becomes a crushing machine. We need the narrows, I said. Constricted flow speeds us up. We ride the crest, and if we don't, we get pasted against the walls. I picked up the pace. Reach. Catch. Power. Release. Lats burned. A familiar ache, feeling like desperation. Julian crawled backward, over the thwarts, closer to me. He watched the water swirling around the tubes. They know the schedule, he said. Teeth clicked together. The chasers. They manage the assets. If the river kills us at 10 o'clock, they won't risk personnel at 9:55. He pointed to a foam line on the wall. 10 feet up. Dried scum from old floods. Target, he chattered. Maximum capacity, impossibly high. At that level, Dead Man's Mile becomes a death chute. A 40-mile-an-hour flume faster, I said. I leaned into the oars. Core engaged. Raft surged, entering the S-turn. Usually, a technical splash. Now, eddies were gone. Water banked off walls, piled into confused pillows. I fought the centrifugal force. Sound changed, deepened. Thunderous vibration in my feet. Watch right, Julian scrambled left. Shifted weight just as a wave crashed the right tube. Jerky. Desperate. But he moved. We cleared the turn. Brief straightaway. Banks blurring grey and red. Time. Julian checked his watch. Expensive chronograph. Stopped at 4:12 yesterday. But he'd reset the bezel. 18 minutes, 2 to the step-up. The river heaved. Not a wave. A swell. Surface level lifting. The horizon line tilted. Here it comes, he whispered. The pulse hit. Speed increased instantly. Pitch went up. A scream of water forced through stone. We were riding the dragon's back, and it was waking up. I looked at Julian. He was gripping the safety line, his face pale, but he was watching the river, counting the seconds. He wasn't just a passenger anymore. He was the clock. We made the entrance to the Narrows, but not by choice. The river essentially threw us into the Slot Canyon, a dark, vertical fissure where the sky was reduced to a thin ribbon of blue. The noise here was deafening. A chaotic echo chamber where the sound of the water folded back on itself until it became a solid wall of pressure. I spotted a potential shelter, a deep, undercut alcove on river left, just behind a massive boulder that split the current. It was a blind eddy, invisible from upstream and shielded from the main flow. "We're stopping," I yelled. I didn't wait for Julian's acknowledgement. I drove the raft hard into the eddy line. The boat spun violently. The transition from fast to slow water, whipping the stern around. We slammed into the rock wall with a jarring thud, but we were out of the current. I tied off the bowline to a jagged spur of rock. My hands were shaking. Not from cold this time, but from a creeping sensation on the back of my neck. "Why are we stopping?" Julian asked. "You said we had to race the surge." "We are racing," I said, climbing out onto the narrow ledge. "But we're losing." I pulled the dry bag from the boat and sat down heavily. I stared at the river rushing past the mouth of our hideout. It was moving fast. Yes. But something about the timing of the sweepers on the rim bothered me. "They knew where we launched," I said. "They knew when we hit the grinder. And that truck. It stopped exactly parallel to us at the shack." Julian wiped his glasses on his shredded shirt. "They have eyes on the rim." "Spotters." "No," I said. "Look at these walls." I gestured to the sheer vertical cliffs rising 300 feet above us. "There are no sightlines here. The canyon twists every 100 yards. Unless they have a satellite directly overhead, which they don't. Because we're in a blind spot. They shouldn't be able to track our speed this accurately." I looked at Julian. Specifically, at his feet. "Take off your shoes." He blinked. "What? Your shoes?" "Take them off." Now, he hesitated, then sat down and untied the laces of his ruined Italian Oxfords. He handed me the left one. I inspected it. Leather sole. Stacked heel. High quality. I twisted the heel. Solid. I took the right one. I ran my thumb along the insole. There was a slight irregularity near the arch support. A lump that shouldn't be there. I pulled my knife. "What are you doing?" Julian asked. Alarmed. I didn't answer. I sliced into the leather lining of the shoe. It peeled back with a tearing sound. Embedded in the cork of the heel was a small, black disc, no bigger than a quarter. It pulsed with a faint, intermittent red light. Julian stared at it. A transponder, passive RFID, or low-frequency GPS. I said, "It pings every time you stop moving for more than a minute." "Or maybe it's continuous." I looked at him. "You didn't escape." "Julian, they let you run." The realization hit him like a physical blow. He slumped back against the rock wall. "They're herding us," he whispered. "They aren't trying to catch us. They're pushing us downstream, into the kill box." I finished. "They know the river. They know where the hazards are. They don't need to shoot us if they can force us into a rapid we can't navigate." I looked at the device in my hand. It was a piece of plastic and silicon, but it carried the weight of a death sentence. "They know exactly where we are," I said. "Right now." I placed the disc on the stone ledge. I picked up a heavy river rock. I didn't smash it immediately. I looked at Julian. "This changes the game," I said. As long as this is active, they are the predators, and we are the prey. But if it goes dark, they'll think the water got us, Julian said, or that the device failed, or that we're dead, I said. And dead people don't run. I brought the rock down. Crack. The plastic shattered. The red light died. The silence that followed felt heavier than the roar of the river. We were invisible now. But we were also blind. The rain, Julian said, looking up at the slice of sky. I followed his gaze. Dark, heavy clouds were gathering at the rim. The first drops began to fall, cold and stinging. That's not just rain, I said. That's a flash flood warning. If the side canyons start to run, the river level won't just step up. It will explode. I looked at the shattered tracker. We aren't racing the corporation anymore. Julian. We're racing the geology. I stood up. Get in the boat. We have to move before they realize their signal is gone. The reprieve of invisibility lasted less than 20 minutes. We were deep in the Narrows now, a section of the river where the walls pinched in to less than 40 feet apart. The water here was deep, fast, and remarkably smooth, a flume, in hydrological terms. We were moving at nearly 12 miles an hour without me even touching the oars. The rain had started in earnest, a cold, driving sheet that blurred the distinction between the river and the air. I was soaked to the bone, my core temperature dropping. I could see Julian shivering violently again, the cognitive hypothermia setting in. I needed to find a way to keep his brain working, Julian. I shouted over the rain. Calculate the flow rate. If the side canyons contribute 10%, what's our arrival time at Dead Man's Drop? He blinked, his eyes unfocused. 10%. Crack. The sound was wrong. It wasn't thunder. Thunder rolled and boomed. This was a sharp, distinct snap, like a dry branch breaking, but amplified 100 times. Then the water next to the raft exploded. Get down! I screamed. I threw my weight forward, flattening myself over the rowing frame. Another crack echoed off the canyon walls. It was impossible to tell where it came from. The acoustics of the gorge were twisting the sound, bouncing it from wall to wall. It sounded like the cliff itself was fracturing snipers, Julian yelled. Curling into a ball on the floor. They're on the rim, I yelled back. They're firing blind. They must have realized the signal was gone. They were spraying the river, hoping for a lucky hit. Or maybe they had thermal optics. Although in this rain, our heat signatures would be muddled. I grabbed the oars, abandoning technique for raw power. I needed to get as close to the wall. Under the angle of fire, right side. Hard right. I pulled on the right oar, pushing on the left, spinning the boat. We careened towards the cliff face. Thwip. Something punched through the rubber of the main tube, inches from my knee. A high-pitched hissing sound joined the roar of the river. It sounded like a dying breath. We're hit, I screamed. The starboard tube began to soften immediately. The structural integrity of the raft relied on air pressure. As the tube deflated, the frame would loosen, the floor would buckle, and the boat would become unsteerable. Patch kit, I yelled at Julian. Get the patch kit. Dry bag C. He stared at me, paralyzed. The cognitive hypothermia was winning. He couldn't process the command. Julian. The blue bag. Now I reached out and shoved him. He stumbled, falling against the softening tube. The movement seemed to jump-start his brain. He grabbed the blue dry bag and tore it open. Another shot hit the water behind us. They were bracketing us. We hit the wall hard. The impact threw me against the frame, winding me. I grabbed a handful of limestone, holding the boat against the rock face. The overhang here offered a sliver of protection from the vertical angle. The hissing was loud. The tube was half flat already. The raft listed heavily to the right, taking on water. "Give it to me," I snarled, snatching the kit from Julian's frozen hands. I ripped open the tube of adhesive. The smell of chemical solvent hit me, sharp and toxic, cutting through the smell of rain and wet stone. "You have to hold the patch," I told him. Looking him dead in the eye, "I'm going to prep the surface. You have to apply pressure. If you let go, we sink. Do you understand?" He nodded. His teeth were chattering so hard I could hear them clicking. I understand. Count," I said, "count the seconds. 1, 1 to 1,000. 2, 1 to 1,000. Focus on the numbers." I slapped the sandpaper against the wet rubber, scouring the area around the bullet hole. The air rushed out, cold against my hand. I squeezed the glue, a thick bead of industrial cement. "Ready," I said. "Press." Julian leaned forward, pressing the patch over the hole with both hands. He closed his eyes. 1, 1 to 1,000. 2, 1 to 1,000. The bullets continued to strike the water out in the main channel, searching for us. We were huddled under a rock, floating on half a boat, glued together by chemicals and desperation. "Keep counting," I whispered. "Just keep counting. 58. 59. 60. Julian's voice cracked on the final number. He slumped forward, his forehead resting against the wet rubber of the tube, but his hands didn't let go. He kept the pressure on the patch, his fingers white and rigid, locked in a rictus of cold and fear. I didn't move immediately. I watched the edges of the patch. The industrial adhesive I used, Clifton urethane, usually required heat and low humidity to cure properly. We had neither. We had freezing rain and a surface temperature of 48 degrees. I was betting our lives on a chemical reaction that shouldn't be working. "Let go," I whispered gently. He peeled his hands away. The patch held. It was ugly, a smear of grey glue oozing out the sides, but the hissing had stopped. The tube was soft, like a bruised lung, holding only about half its pressure, but it was holding. I grabbed the hand pump. "I need to top it off." "Stay low." A bullet struck the water 3 feet from the stern, sending a spray of cold water over my neck. I flinched, instinctively curling around the pump. They were still there. The snipers on the rim hadn't given up. They had just adjusted their rhythm. They were firing methodically now, spacing the shots every 10 seconds, walking the fire line down the length of the eddy. "They can't see us," Julian said. He was huddled in the footwell, staring up at the sliver of grey sky between the canyon walls. His teeth were chattering, but his voice had that strange, detached quality again. The auditor was back. "They're guessing," I grunted, driving the pump handle down. The air wheezed into the tube, bracket fire. "They know we're in this sector." "No," he said. "It's a grid. Look at the splashes." He pointed to the water beyond our shelter. Impact A was 10 yards upstream. Impact B was 5 yards. Impact C was right next to us. They're decreasing the interval by fixed increments. They're painting the river blindly. He looked at the overhang above us. Then at the angle of the opposite cliff wall. He held up his hand, creating a crude frame, measuring the geometry of the canyon. "The trajectory," he muttered, "if they are on the logging road. The angle of incidence is steep. 45 degrees at least." He turned to me. "There's a shadow zone. A geometric blind spot where the ballistic arc can't reach the water surface because of the overhang on the opposing wall." I stopped pumping. "Where?" "Center channel," he said. "Bias left. About 15 feet off the south wall. The rock face there flares out. It blocks the line of sight from the north rim." I looked at the river. The center channel was the fastest water, the exposed vein of the flood. It went against every survival instinct to put a damaged boat into the teeth of the current while under fire. But staying here meant waiting for the grid to find us. "We move," I said. Now, I scrambled to re-rig the boat. The frame was loose, rattling against the under-inflated tubes. I tightened the straps with numb fingers. The rain was coming down harder, a deluge that washed the blood from Julian's knuckles and the mud from the floor. "Get ready to high side," I ordered. "The boat is soft. It's going to fold in the waves." "You have to be the skeleton," I shoved off. The current grabbed us instantly, ripping us out of the eddy. Crack! A bullet hit the water right where we had been floating seconds ago. Julian was right. The grid had closed. Center left, Julian screamed. I pulled hard on the right oar, driving us into the meat of the current. The water roared, drowning out the sound of the rain. We hit the shadow zone he had calculated. I waited for the impact, for the sound of tearing rubber or shattering bone. Nothing. We were moving at 12 miles an hour, shielded by a curtain of limestone geometry. Julian had done the math of survival. But the river exacted a toll for the passage. As we hit the first standing wave of the chute, the boat buckled. The soft starboard tube compressed, and the frame shifted violently. The sudden lurch threw the contents of the boat forward. "The bag!" Julian yelled. I looked back. The yellow dry bag, Bag C, had slipped its loose strap. It was teetering on the edge of the stern. That bag held the first aid kit, the remaining food, the thermal blankets. It was our life support system. I lunged for it, abandoning the oars. My fingers brushed the plastic buckle. At the same moment, the boat hit a lateral wave. The impact threw Julian across the cockpit. He slammed into the rowing frame, his head snapping back. He groaned and slid toward the low side, half his body hanging over the water. Rule of the river. People first. Gear second. It wasn't a choice. It was a reflex. I let the bag go. I grabbed Julian by the back of his life jacket and hauled him back into the center of the boat. I watched the yellow bag bob once in the grey water, a bright spot of color in a monochrome world, before the river swallowed it. We were safe from the bullets. We were alive. But we were stripped bare. No food. No heat. No bandages. I looked at Julian. He was slumped against the thwart, clutching his ribs. He looked at the empty spot where the bag had been. Then at me. "I calculated the angle," he whispered. Shivering. "I didn't calculate the mass shift. You saved us from the bullets," I said. My voice hard to hide, the fear rising in my throat. The river took its tax. "That's how it works." I grabbed the oars again. My hands felt empty. Lighter. The boat was lighter. But the weight on my shoulders had just doubled. We had survived the second escalation. But we were entering the final stretch, with nothing but our bodies and the dying boat beneath us. The sound changed first. For the last hour, the canyon had been filled with the noise of the river, a constant, churning roar of water over stone. But this was different. This was a vibration, a low-frequency thrumming that I felt in my teeth before I heard it with my ears. It sounded like a freight train moving through a tunnel, deep underground. "It's here," I said. We were drifting in a section of flat water, the calm before the drop. Ahead of us, the river vanished. The horizon line was a straight, sharp edge where the water fell away into Dead Man's Drop. On a normal day, it was a Class 4 waterfall, a 20-foot vertical plunge into a chaotic pool. Today, it would be a meat grinder. I looked at Julian. He was in bad shape. Without the thermal blankets, the cold was dismantling him systemically. He was curled into a ball, his movements jerky and uncoordinated. The umbles had progressed to apathy. He was staring at the floor of the raft, his eyes glazed. Rule number 3 of canyon survival: cognitive hypothermia. Long before the heart stops, the brain shuts down. The ability to process complex variables vanishes. And right now, I needed his brain more than I needed his heartbeat. I reached over and slapped him. Hard. His head snapped up, shock cutting through the stupor. "Focus," I yelled, grabbing his face with my wet hands. "I need you here. Right now." "Do you hear that sound?" He blinked. "Listening." The surge. The dam release," I said. "The wall of water you predicted. It's catching up to us. We have maybe 3 minutes before it hits this section." I pointed downstream to the horizon line. "That's Dead Man's Drop. At this water level, the hydraulic at the bottom is a keeper, a drowning machine. If we go over now, the boat will recirculate until we're dead. The hole is too deep." I saw the gears in his mind trying to turn, grinding against the cold sludge of his blood. "Hydraulics," he mumbled. "Energy dissipation. I need a line." "Julian, how do we beat a hole that covers the entire river?" He dragged himself up, looking at the water. He looked at the canyon walls, where the high water marks from the 1983 flood were visible. He looked back upstream, where a mist was rising, heralding the arrival of the wavefront. "We don't beat it," he whispered. "We bury it." "What?" "The volume," he said, his voice gaining a fraction of strength. "When the surge hits, the CFS triples. The velocity increases. The water won't just fill the hole. It will overshoot it." He looked at me, his eyes clearing for a second. "The wave. The crest of the flood. It creates a ramp. If we launch exactly when the surge hits the lip of the falls, we ride the flood over the hole." I finished, like a ski jump. "Yes." "But the timing," he looked at his wrist. But his watch was gone, lost in the scramble or tucked away. He looked at the river. "Lift. We need maximum lift. If we're too early," I asked, "we fall into the hole. We drown. If we're too late, the turbulence of the surge. It will tear the boat apart. We drown, so we have to surf the nose of a flash flood," I said. It was insanity. It was suicide. "It was the only physics that made sense, the sweepers," Julian said. "Looking back upstream, they'll be on the rim, waiting for us to flush out. They won't be looking for us on top of the water," I said. "They'll be looking for debris." The roar grew louder. Behind us, the river turned a muddy, violent brown. I could see it now, a wall of water, 4 feet high, carrying logs, trees, and silt. It was moving faster than a runabout. It was erasing the riverbank as it came. I turned the boat, pointing the bow downstream, aiming for the center of the drop. I held us there, rowing upstream just enough to hold our position against the current, hovering on the lip of the abyss. "Tell me when," I said. My muscles were coiled, burning with lactic acid. The boat felt fragile, a toy waiting to be crushed. Julian watched the wall of water approaching. It looked like the end of the world. A churning, grinding monster that smelled of wet earth and destruction. "Wait," he said. The spray from the surge was already hitting us. "Julian, wait! The wall was 50 yards away." 30. 10. The boat began to lift, the stern rising as the pressure wave went under us. "Now," he screamed, "row!" Row. I didn't think. I didn't breathe. I dug the oars into the water, pulling with every ounce of strength I had left, converting fear into propulsion. The boat surged forward, caught by the leading edge of the flood. We weren't floating anymore. We were flying. We hit the lip of the falls just as the mountain of water arrived. The world fell away beneath us. We weren't falling into the river. We were riding the storm that was destroying it. Gravity is usually a constant. In the canyon, it became a suggestion. For a heartbeat that stretched into an eternity, we weren't in the river. We were above it. Julian's math had been perfect. The surge, that massive, brown muscle of water, had hit the lip of the falls at the exact second we launched. It didn't just fill the hydraulic hole at the bottom, it paved over it. We were riding a liquid ramp, a chaotic ski jump constructed of mud, timber, and millions of gallons of force. We were airborne. I saw the world in a snapshot, frozen by adrenaline. To my left, the sheer granite wall where the snipers had been stationed, I saw a figure on the rim, a tiny silhouette against the storm clouds, lowering a rifle. He wasn't shooting. He was watching. There was nothing he could do. The river had taken jurisdiction. Below us, Dead Man's Drop was a churning cauldron of white violence. The keeper hole, the recirculation that drowned swimmers and held rafts until they rotted, was buried under the flood. But the landing zone was chaos. "Brace!" I screamed. I didn't know if Julian heard me. He was curled into the floor of the raft, his hands locked onto the safety line with a grip that would require a crowbar to break. He was doing the only thing he could, becoming part of the boat. We hit. It wasn't a splash. It was a car crash. We slammed into the pillow, the aerated cushion of water at the base of the falls, with a force that rattled my teeth. The sound was a physical blow, a thunderclap that deafened me instantly. Rule number 4 of the drop: aim for the soft water. We hit the soft water. But at that velocity, water isn't soft. It's concrete that moves. The raft folded. The soft starboard tube, patched with my desperation and Julian's thumb pressure, collapsed instantly. The frame buckled. I felt the oar tower twist, the metal groaning as it sheared off. The boat tachoed, wrapping around us like a giant rubber clam. Then the river swallowed us. We went under. Deep. The light vanished, replaced by a suffocating brown darkness. I was torn from the rowing seat. The turbulence was absolute, a washing machine on the spin cycle, tumbling me over and over until I didn't know which way was up. My life jacket, 22 pounds of flotation, felt like a toy. The current grabbed my legs and yanked, trying to strip my boots off. I tucked into a ball, protecting my head and vital organs. This was the Maytag. You don't fight the Maytag. You wait for it to spit you out. I held my breath, counting. 1 Mississippi. 2 Mississippi. Debris struck me. A log. A piece of the boat. I felt a sharp pain in my shoulder, but there was no room for it in my brain. My mind was entirely focused on the burn in my lungs. 10 Mississippi. I was still down. The pressure in my ears was immense. The surge was grinding the bottom of the canyon, scouring the bedrock. If I hit a rock now, at this speed, I would break. Suddenly, the violence shifted. The tumbling stopped, replaced by a swift, linear pool. The flushing channel. I kicked hard, fighting for the surface. The darkness turned from black to grey, then to a foamy, angry white. I broke the surface, gasping. The air tasted of rain and ozone. I cleared my eyes and spun in the water, looking for the boat, looking for Julian. The raft was gone. Shredded rubber and bent aluminum were scattered across the wave train downstream. "Julian!" I screamed. My voice sounded tiny against the roar of the flood. Nothing. Just the heaving brown back of the river, carrying trees and silt toward the sea. Then, a flash of orange, 50 yards downstream, bobbing in the tailwaves. A life jacket, and inside it, a man. He wasn't swimming. He was floating face up, compliant, letting the river take him. He had listened. Don't fight. Float. I swam. I swam with the desperation of a guide who had never lost a passenger. I cut across the eddy line, fighting the boils that tried to suck me back under. My shoulder screamed with every stroke, but I ignored it. I reached him. I grabbed the strap of his vest and hauled his head up. "Julian!" he coughed. A racking, violent spasm that expelled water. His eyes opened. The glasses were gone. His face was scraped raw. But he was there. "The numbers," he wheezed, staring up at the rain. I checked the numbers. "We made it," I said. Treading water. Keeping his head above the chop, we cleared the drop. He looked back upstream. The waterfall was a wall of mist and noise. The kill box was behind us. The snipers. The corporation. The trap. They were all on the other side of that wall of water. The flood had wiped the slate clean. The current here was fast, but linear. It was carrying us out of the gorge, towards the widening mouth of the canyon, where the walls receded and the river slowed. I looked at the water around us. It was full of debris, branches, plastic bottles, pieces of our boat. We were just more debris, carried by the purge. "Kick," I told him. "Kick your legs." "Julian, we have to make the shore before the hypothermia finishes what the river started," he kicked. It was weak, uncoordinated, but it was movement. We were two broken things, drifting in the wreckage of a disaster, pushing slowly toward the mud. The silence was heavier than the water. That was the first thing I registered as the adrenaline began to bleed out of my system, leaving behind a cold, hollow ache. The roar of Dead Man's Drop was a distant memory now, a low vibration miles upstream. Here, in the lower basin, the river was wide, flat, and brown. It moved with a deceptively lazy power, sliding past the sandbars like liquid glass. We were alive. I dragged myself up the silt bank, my boots sinking into the mud. My legs felt like they didn't belong to me. I reached back and grabbed Julian's harness, hauling him out of the shallows. He crawled on his hands and knees, coughing, shivering so violently his teeth sounded like dice in a cup. We collapsed on the driftwood, two sodden heaps of exhaustion under a clearing sky. The storm had broken. Shafts of late afternoon sunlight were piercing the clouds, turning the wet canyon walls to gold and blood red. I lay on my back, staring at the sky. My shoulder throbbed with a dull, rhythmic pain. I was bruised, battered, and I had lost my boat, my livelihood, my partner. But my chest rose and fell. Air went in. Air went out. We need fire," Julian stammered. I sat up. I looked at him. The expensive Italian suit was gone, shredded into rags. He was covered in mud, his hair plastered to his skull. He looked like a refugee from a shipwreck, but his eyes were clear. The vague, amnesiac fog was gone. "No gear," I said. My voice was raspy. "Bags gone. Lighters are gone." He looked at his hands. They were raw, bleeding from the rocks. "Then we walk," he said. I looked downriver, about a mile away, on the north bank. I could see the glint of metal. A truck. A ranger patrol vehicle parked at the haul-out ramp. "We don't have to walk far," I said, pointing. He squinted, seeing the truck. His shoulders slumped, the tension finally leaving his frame "It's over," he whispered. "For you," I said. "The hard part starts now. You have to talk. You have to tell them everything. About the cracks, the payoffs, the release schedule." He nodded. He looked at the river, watching the brown water slide by. "I remember the codes," he said. "They thought the water would wash it all away. But they forgot the variables. They forgot the river," I said. "The river doesn't take sides. It just flows." We sat there for a long time, watching the water. There was no hug, no tearful embrace. We weren't friends. We weren't lovers. We were two people who had seen the face of a god and lived to tell about it. That was a bond tighter than any romance. It was the trauma bond of the canyon. He stood up, swaying slightly. He held out a hand to me. I looked at it. The hand of an auditor. Soft, uncalloused, but steady now. I took it. He pulled me up. "Thank you," he said, "for the math. And the rowing." "You did the math," I corrected. "I'd just pulled the sticks." We started walking toward the ranger truck. The mud sucked at our boots. I stopped once and looked back upstream. The canyon mouth was a dark gash in the earth. The river was still rising, fed by the dam release, flushing the secrets of Varian energy out to sea. It looked beautiful, and it looked indifferent. I had spent my life thinking I could read the river, that I could understand it. Today, I realized I didn't understand anything. I had just survived it. I turned my back on the water. "Let's go," I said. "I have a statement to give." Julian walked beside me. He didn't limp. He walked with a strange, new cadence, matching his stride to mine. The auditor and the guide, walking out of the mud. Behind us, the river continued its work, carving the canyon a little deeper, one grain of sand at a time. It would be there long after we were gone, long after the dam was built, and long after it crumbled. It was the last current, and it was the only one that mattered.